coaching series. So what we're doing at the moment is we're taking our team through a variety of different tools and techniques that we use, either around hazard identification or safety in the various different disciplines that we work in. And we wanted to share this with everybody so that everybody could benefit from the coaching exercise. So just a quick recap on yesterday. We spoke about a hazard, okay? And a hazard is anything that can cause harm, particularly because we're talking about occupational health and safety. It can cause injury and ill health, and we spoke about the difference between the two. So an injury could be a cut, an abrasion, something like that, where you've got a finger amputation or a broken finger. That would be an injury. And ill health we spoke about yesterday as something that is acute or chronic. What was the difference between the two? Can you remember?
Yes, okay. An injury is when you get hurt with this short term, and an ill health is something that's long term, which, for example, could be cancer.
Okay, so ill health can be both acute, which is immediate, if I inhale chemicals and I can collapse, which is acute, or it can have a chronic impact, which is ill health over a period of time. We also spoke about yesterday, we spoke about the various different hazard categories. So when we're looking at hazards for an activity, it's helpful to us to break them down into categories so that it'll aid us in the assessment of those hazards. So some of the categories we spoke about yesterday is mechanical hazards. So as an example today, we're going to be looking at the hazards associated with a portable hand grinder. So some of the mechanical hazards that we spoke about yesterday were nip points, moving machinery. Okay, I'm going to take that off there and we'll get that down to a low level. So we've got mechanical hazards, we've got electrical hazards such as live electricity, we've got physical hazards associated with the activity or the work environment as well. So noise, dust, vibration, which can result in hand-arm vibration, or if you're on a moving facility, it can also be a whole body vibration, heat and light. All of these have an impact on the human being while they're doing the work. So ergonomic hazards we spoke about yesterday, it's how the human being interacts with the working environment. So lifting, twisting, repetitive strain injuries. Remember, as I said, if you're constantly moving and doing the same activity, it can have an impact on your body. We also spoke about biological hazards. So we've got viruses. We're all experiencing COVID-19 right now. Bacteria such as staphylococcus. Also protozoa as well, such as malaria. All of these biological hazards can impact the human body, and many of them cause ill health. Excellent. So we also spoke about chemical hazards. So chemicals can be caustic, toxic, corrosive, irritant, asphyxiant, so they can have a variety of different impacts. And also, last but not least, we spoke about psychosocial hazards. So psychosocial hazards will be some of the stresses between human beings. So if I've got to work long hours and I can be fatigued, but let's say it's the anxiety or the depression, or let's say there's victimization and bullying in the workplace. Those are all psychosocial hazards. So whenever we do a risk assessment, we start off by identifying the hazards associated with the activity, and here's just a breakdown of some of the hazard categories. And again, a hazard is anything that can cause harm. We're looking at occupational health and safety, and that can cause injury and ill health. So what we're going to do is we'll bring up a form on the video just now so you can see the checklist that we're going to do. So I've given you guys a copy of the hazard checklist. Now what that is a prompted checklist to help you guys to identify some of the hazard categories associated with the use of this tool. So remember, one of the foundational things of what we do in health and safety is hazard identification and risk assessment. Remember, the focus of health and safety is we want to prevent injury and ill health in the workplace. And the way that we go about that is identifying what could cause injury or ill health and making sure that suitable protective measures are in place to prevent injury and ill health. Okay, so if you have a look at that checklist, we'll bring it up on the screen just now so everybody else can participate on it. What do you think are some of the things from that list? Snare, maybe I could just maybe I could just borrow your list for a second. So if I have a look at the list and we're looking at moving machinery, there's no conveyors associated with it. Do you think there are possible nip points on this? We spoke about this yesterday. So where the grindstone comes into contact with the guard, that can create a nip point as well. So whenever you're going through the hazard checklist and you find a hazard, you just want to tick that off to indicate that that hazard is present. So again, this checklist is developed just to provide you with some prompters on various different hazard types and categories. So do you think there's a sharp blade?
Yes.
So when this thing gets going, it gets very hot and very sharp. Okay? So do you think this has anything to do with vehicles? No. Okay? What about fires and explosions? Now I want you guys to think very carefully about this. When I'm grinding, if I'm cutting metal with this, what do you think is produced when I'm cutting metal with the grinding stone?
There will be sparks.
There will be sparks. So when I'm cutting, do you think I need to be aware of possible fires or explosions? Okay, so I need to look out for flammable substances and combustible materials. Okay, so you can tick those off on the fires and explosions. Flammable materials, combustible materials, we need to be aware of those. Do you think there's friction? So friction is going to result in an excessive amount of heat. So there's going to be a significant amount of friction. So yes, sparks, grinding, you can tick those off. Pressurized systems. Now, one thing that we need to be aware of, particularly when we're using a grinder, that there have been some terrible incidents when people have cut into old LPG gas tanks, etc., that still have gas inside them. Okay? So that you're not grinding into pressurized systems. Now, hazardous objects, do you think this is sharp?
Yes.
Do you think it could become hot?
Yes.
Definitely. And also the material that you're cutting could become hot as well. Hazardous chemicals, do you think there are any hazardous chemicals associated with this? Well, we don't know at the moment because we're not looking at a specific activity. Now, what about the work environment? In the work environment, do you think there could be heat or noise or dust? Now remember that when I'm cutting with the grinder as well, this is going to produce, it could produce fumes, it could produce dust, it could produce a whole lot of things that I'm going to inhale, or, team, is that there could be dust. Let's say I'm out on a construction site, I could be cutting, but just because of the amount of dust that hasn't been wet and it's up in the air, I could inhale dust. So the dust can either be created by the activity or it could be part of the work environment as well. Okay, so there's a whole load of work environmental hazards that you guys can tick off there. Now, let's talk about electrical hazards. So, what do you think is the danger here?
It's the cord. It could be the cord when it's uncut or when the wires inside are exposed.
Okay, so there's a couple of things. There's the plug that I plug this into, could be a source of electrocution. The cable, and also is part of that pre-use inspection is to examine the casing of the piece of equipment, because obviously a lot of the electrical wiring, etc., is on the inside of here. So, yeah, there's the potential for electrocution. Ergonomics. Now remember, I said to you, there are ergonomic hazards about how the human being is going to interact with the work environment as well. So, yes, do you think this has been ergonomically designed? Remember we spoke about that with the activation button. I've got a stabilization handle because when you get grinding, this kicks off. So there's going to be quite a lot of ergonomic hazards from this, because when I'm grinding, I'm going to be applying pressure with my muscles and my skeletal system. So what about psychological hazards? Do you think there could be some psychological hazards? We spoke about those psychosocial hazards, depending on how long the working hours, whether you guys are all being abusive to me while I'm working. Those are all those psychosocial hazards. Now also this could be some environmental hazards associated with this. Remember, what do I need to power the angle grinder? I need electricity, which is an environmental impact. Now also, I'm going to create waste from this as well. So there'll be grind discs that will be waste. There's going to be offcuts of metal, etc. So there's going to be quite a lot of waste created by this. And then I've put a list in there, quality hazards. So the way that this sheet works is we give you some prompters to identify possible hazards, but there's no way that we can identify all hazards on a sheet. So that's why we've left a couple of blank columns there for you guys to identify additional hazards that are associated with this that aren't necessarily on the sheet. Now, as I said, this tool is there to help you guys to identify hazards associated with an activity. But remember when we spoke yesterday, we said that one of the best ways, if I'm just looking at this, do you think I'll be able to identify all hazards associated with the activity?
No.
Or do you think I need to analyze the actual job and the way that it works to be able to effectively identify all the hazards?
You need to analyze.
Okay, so we spoke yesterday, the way of doing this assessment has so many different names. JHA, Job Hazard Analysis, Job Safety Analysis, there's a whole load of different terms. So if you have a look at the form on the back there, what I've done is we've created a sample JSA, and what we're going to do as a team together, which we'll then add into this video, is we're going to go through some of the process steps. That will help us to identify some of the hazards, and then we will state what the various different types of controls that we have in place. So if we had to do that, so if I've got to, let's say I've got to grind the metal off this board, what do you think would be the first thing that we do with this? We're doing our JSA, and remember yesterday we spoke about breaking it down into pre-work activities, work activities, and post-work activities. So in terms of before I start the work, what do you think are some of the things that I should do?
You need to check if the grinder is in the proper state for you to work, for you not to get hurt, to check if everything is correct, for example, the desk. If it's in place or if it's the correct
and
size.
It's tight.
And if it's tight.
Okay, so one of the first steps there would be to do a pre-use inspection of the tool or equipment. Checking the guards in place, checking the handles in tight, checking the machine casing, the disc is in place, everything is secure, there's no cracks in the casing. I would then also inspect the cable and the plug. So step one would be do a pre-use inspection of the equipment. Step two, but remember that the hazards associated with this task are not just the equipment. What about the work environment as well? So I need to inspect the hazards with the equipment, also with the work area. If I'm working the work area, if I'm going to be grinding and sparks are going to be created by this, what else do I want to be aware of in this area?
Housekeeping.
Why housekeeping? Good statement.
To avoid hazard or any injury.
Okay, that's also good, but remember we spoke about flammable substances and combustible substances. I want to take anything that could catch on fire out of the way here. Now remember, do you think if I'm cutting here and there's going to be sparks, do you think I can let people walk in the area? No. So I need to make sure that the work area is safe as well. So step one, inspect the work, or inspect the tools and the equipment. Step two, inspect the work area to make sure that it is safe. Right. So the tools and the equipment is safe, the work area is safe. Also, do you think I'm going to need personal protective equipment from this? Okay, what PPE, if I'm going to be using this, what PPE do you think I should wear?
Gloves.
Why do you think I should wear gloves?
To protect your hands.
Okay, so that's a good thing, but also what you need to be aware of as well, the gloves can protect you. Now, I think gloves would be, we can debate whether it's good to wear with this, but also just remember, like with a hand drill, sometimes if you're wearing gloves and you're drilling, that glove can get caught on the drill bit as well. So yes, you could wear gloves because you're going to be away from the grind disc. Okay, so gloves. What else? Remember that the sparks created, what do you think I want to protect?
Shield or goggles.
Okay, so full face shield or goggles to protect my eyes and my face from sparks. So let's say pre-work, step one, inspect the equipment. Step two, make sure that the work area is safe. Step three is to put on all my PPE and make sure that myself and the other operators are safe. So this is a very simple approach, but just to break it down. So that would be three of the pre-use steps. And what we would then do is identify some of the hazards. What are the dangers? So the dangers would be that we don't do an inspection on the equipment, or that we don't inspect the area, or that we don't put our PPE, and we would then list some of the controls to be in place. Now we're going to do the grinding. If I'm going to do the grinding, what do you think I should do? What do you think the first steps are? So we're ready to go. I've now got to cut this. What do you think we should do?
I think your posture of how you hold the grinder in work is very important.
Okay.
Because you keep balance and you don't lose control as it's forceful, kind of like. So it doesn't,
very forceful.
Yes, it doesn't get out of your hand and hurt you.
Okay, excellent. So when I press the on button, this thing kicks. It's got a very, very strong kick as the motor comes in. So I've got to make sure that the grinder is secure in my hand, but also I need to make sure that the work that I'm going to be grinding is secure as well. What happens if this is not secure? As I start cutting, it could jump and fly all over the place. So make sure that the grinder is secure, make sure that the work that you're going to grind is secure. Activate the machine and grind. Do you think I should grind cutting towards myself? No, definitely. That can result and has resulted in some very, very nasty injuries. So when I'm grinding, I'm cutting away from myself, making sure that I'm not cutting towards anybody else. Something else to mention is that we always need to make sure that the disc that we're using is the right type for what we're cutting. You get different discs. You'll get discs for cutting concrete or masonry, etc. Different discs for cutting steel. So that's how I'm grinding, and I've now ground the work down. I'm now finished with the work. I've now cut it off. What do you think I now need to do?
To make sure, when you put back, for example, the angle grinder that you're using, you make sure if it's in place, everything is correct, so you put it away and you pack it, and you clean it where you are working.
Okay.
Make sure it's clean.
Okay, do you think this is hot?
Yes.
Do you think the work surface is hot?
Yes.
Okay, so we need to make sure that this is allowed to cool and it's safe. Now, one of the other things when working with this cord, do you think this could create a tripping hazard for people?
Yes.
So you need to be cautious of tripping hazards. Make sure that the work area is clean when you're finished. Make sure that what you have been grinding has cooled down, because where a lot of fires have started is where you've been grinding and it's still hot and you go off and some paper or some wood or whatever comes up against what you're grinding and the fire starts. So we call that a fire watch. There's many different names for it. So if we had to look at the activity, I've got some pre-use stuff that I've got to do. I've then got to make sure that the work is performed safely, and then post-work to inspect the work area to make sure that everything is safe, pack the tools and equipment away in the right area, and then obviously everything can resume. So that's a very simple approach. So in summary today, what we've spoken about is a hazard. We've spoken about the various different hazard categories. We've used the hazard and aspect checklist to help us, as it's a list of prompters, to help us to identify all the hazards associated with the equipment, but also with the activity. We spoke very, very simply about how to create a JSA, the various different job steps, what are the pre-use activities that we need to do, how do we perform the work safely, and what we would do is we would list the work steps, such as make sure that you're grinding away from yourself. What is the hazard? You could pull it into yourself or pull it into others. What are the precautions? Making sure that people are trained, that they're aware, that the area is clear. So with all the work steps, we'll list what the work steps are, identify what the dangers are, and make sure that suitable precautions are in place. Because remember, our health and safety system is there to help prevent injury and ill health by identifying hazards and identifying suitable controls to make sure that the work can be performed safely. Are there any questions? No? Paul? Everything? Okay, guys, thanks very much for joining us for this morning's series on safety coaching, where we looked at hazard identification in a very, very simplified format of a job safety analysis.